On September 18th, 1889, an aristocratic young woman moved into a house in the near West Side, the neighborhood of Johnny Powers, Prince of the Boodlers, to see if she could help. The work she did would make Jane Addams the most famous woman in America, the most famous woman in the world after Queen Victoria. The press would call her Saint Jane. Addams was born in Cedarville, an Illinois prairie town, the pampered daughter of its wealthiest merchant. She was among the first generation of women to graduate from college.
She graduated with energy and enthusiasm and nowhere to expend it. As a young single woman at the time, she was expected to either marry or stay home and become everyone's favorite aunt and take care of the family. And she wanted more from her life.
She took 2 grand tours of Europe, and when she tired of the galleries, she wandered into Whitechapel, a slum in London's East End. There, she found her calling.
She goes through an epiphanal experience. It's kind of a slap in the face. She writes something like, you know, there were these prostitutes of Whitechapel. This is Jack the Ripper time, right? And he sees 12-year-old, 13-year-old prostitutes, and she says, there but for the grace of God go I. Those people look like little Janie. So why is, you know, back home we're saying, well, that's those people who do that, those people from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, black people. But here's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant prostitute. That could be Jane Addams. So what's the difference between me and that girl?
Jane Addams visited Toynbee Hall in the East End, the world's first settlement house established by Oxford graduates. To break down class barriers, they taught art and literature to the poor. In Chicago, she bought the rundown mansion of Charles Hull, now surrounded by a sea of immigrants in the city's worst neighborhood. At age 29, Jane Addams established Hull House, her own settlement house in the near West Side. She recruited about 20 upper-class white women and moved in.
She decided to move into the community because she had learned from the boys at Toynbee Hall that the only way to understand poverty was to live the life of poverty, was to move into it.
What Jane Addams originally hoped to accomplish sounds quite humble. It was a desire to create mutual social relations between the working class and the steward class, or the more blessed members of society. Her belief was that democracy is enhanced if every member of the democracy understands the point of view of other members of the democracy.
She began by offering her poor neighbors, as Toynbee Hall had, upper-class culture, including classes in Shakespeare.
Now imagine this, you know, Shakespeare in the West Side, in the middle of the West Side. These people are poor, they don't necessarily know where their next meal's coming from, but the crazy lady who opened what looked to be a whorehouse, but it's really something called a Southern House, wants them to sit around and have tea and discuss somebody named Shakespeare. I would have loved to have been there for that first meeting of the Shakespeare Club at Hull House.
She was attracting a working class population of what I might call strivers who aspired to middle class status. And they did attend these classes because that was an avenue of survival, and very popular English classes were taught at Hull House. People were not conscripted to take those classes. People were grateful for an opportunity to have somebody teach them English for free, and in a setting in which they were going to be treated with dignity.
Addams believed in the refining power of art. Near West Side visitors were treated to reproductions of the European masters. She soon learned her neighbors had more basic needs. We were ready to perform the humblest neighborhood services, she later wrote. We were asked to wash the newborn babies and to prepare the dead for burial, to nurse the sick, and to mind the children. Supported by wealthy patrons, Hull House ran a nursery, kindergarten classes, clubs for older children, and night classes for adults. It offered people who could not bathe all winter public baths, a gymnasium, a swimming pool, and the city's first public playground. Many of the 9,000 visitors a week that Hull House would come to attract came to hear lectures on the pressing issues of the day.
Jane Addams was a great believer in free speech. Hull House had socialists come and talk here, they had anarchists come and talk here, they even had vegetarians come and talk here. So they were open to ideas. They wanted them to be out in the public.
Some Hull House projects were more successful than others. Tearing down a tenement to build a playground was not a success.
People were really hostile for a reason that nobody in the settlement house ever thought about. And it was that by having this tenement torn down, they had in effect reduced the number of apartments available. And what they learned is that a ratty apartment is better than no apartment at all.
Another project was to provide ready-made meals for women to take home to their families.
Sounds like a great idea. People stayed away in droves. There was a lot of creamed codfish on the menu and mutton stew. No spaghetti, no kielbasa. People in this neighborhood were not interested in Hull House's sort of sanitized version of good food. They also may have offended the sensibilities of the women in this neighborhood. The role of cooking for your family was considered a very primary role for most women. And who were these young women? How dare they try to cook for people's families? So the public kitchen was never much of a success.
Jane Addams had more success when she tackled the garbage problem. The alleyways of the near West Side were piled high with garbage, infested with maggots.
Children were playing with maggots as if they were little pets. And she recognized that this was tremendously dangerous for the health of the community. There was diphtheria in this community, there was typhoid in this community, there was a high death rate of children below the age of 5.
The ward bosses just didn't care about such things. They didn't care about health measures. The positions were political patronage positions. The people in charge of getting rid of the garbage were not interested in their task, and the ward bosses were interested in the patronage, not in the cleaning of garbage.
Jane Addams tried to unseat Johnny Powers as alderman and lost. He could get his voters jobs. She could not. She did get herself appointed the ward's garbage inspector at $1,000 a year, the only paying job she ever had.
Jane Addams got up every morning at the crack of dawn and followed the garbage wagons through this neighborhood. Garbage was put into wooden boxes that were basically nailed to the wooden sidewalks. And so it wasn't simply a matter of sort of picking up the box and throwing it into the back of a wagon. You had to shovel this garbage out. Now, if you were a political patronage appointee, chances are you didn't feel much incentive to dig too deep into the garbage boxes. And she made sure they hit bottom